The ranch was supposed to be nothing more than a joke, a punchline buried in the fine print of a foreclosure auction nobody attended. The kind of thing men laughed about at bars, when they were trying to pretend life hadn't cornered them yet. $1, that was the price, one single, insulting dollar for 200 acres of sunburned land, a collapsing house, and a reputation so rotten that even the vultures circled somewhere else. Caleb Hayes didn't laugh when he raised his hand. He hadn't laughed much since the accident, since the city had spat him out with a settlement check and a silence that followed him everywhere. He bought the ranch because it was cheap, because it was empty, and because emptiness felt like honesty when he drove out there for the first time, thus chasing his tires like it wanted answers. The land greeted him with a strange stillness. Not peace, no. Peace implies welcome. This was more like waiting. The house stood at the center like a tired old man leaning on a cane, windows dark, porch sagging, paint peeling in long white scars. Locals had warned him without really warning him, shaking their heads, saying things like that place never stays empty or folks don't last out there. Caleb ignored them. He wasn't planning on lasting. He just wanted somewhere no one expected anything from him. Inside, the house smelled of age and neglect, wood and dust, and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. Floors creaked under his boots as if whispering complaints. He noticed small things that didn't make sense: fresh footprints in dust that should have been undisturbed for years, a kettle sitting clean on a stove that hadn't been lit, a door upstairs locked from the inside. He told himself it was raccoons or squatters, or his mind finally cracking under the weight of too many quiet nights. That was the moment he heard it, a soft sound, almost swallowed by the walls. A breath, not his. Caleb froze, every instinct flaring at once, heart pounding loud enough to betray him. He stood there listening, counting seconds, waiting for the sound to come again, for proof that he hadn't imagined it. The house settled around him, wood popping, wine pressing gently at the windows, and then there it was, a movement upstairs, slow, careful, human. He didn't call out at first. Something about the silence felt fragile, like a held breath that would shatter if he spoke. He climbed the stairs one step at a time, hand brushing the railing, noticing how worn the banister was, how often it must have been touched. At the end of the hall, the locked door stood slightly ajar now, though he knew it hadn't been before. The air beyond it felt warmer, lived in. Caleb pushed the door open and found himself staring at a girl, standing barefoot in the center of a room that looked nothing like the rest of the house. Curtains hung clean and white, sunlight spilling through them, plants lining the windowsill like they belonged there. She looked as startled as he felt, eyes wide, hair pulled back in a messy knot, a defensive tension in her shoulders as if she'd learned long ago to be ready to run. Neither of them spoke. Seconds stretched, heavy with confusion and something sharper beneath it. Finally she broke the silence, voice steady but quiet. She asked him what he was doing in her house. The words hit him harder than any accusation. Her house. He told her he'd bought the place. $1. He even laughed then, a short, humorless sound, as if the absurdity might protect him. She didn't laugh back. Her expression shifted, instead fear, relief, and something like resignation all passing through her eyes. She told him her name was Mara. She said she'd been living there for years, and when he asked how, when the ranch had been abandoned, she simply said, "It never was." They sat across from each other on opposite sides of the room, the distance between them filled with unspoken questions neither seemed ready to ask. Mara explained things in fragments, as if too much truth at once might collapse the fragile reality. She'd built. She said the ranch had belonged to her family once. That paperwork disappeared the way things sometimes do, when people in power want and more than stories. She said she stayed, because leaving felt like erasing the last proof that she'd existed here at all. Caleb listened, feeling something inside him shift uncomfortably. He had come here to disappear, but instead he'd walked straight into someone else's fight for survival. When he told her he wasn't there to throw her out, that he didn't even know what he was going to do with the place, her eyes searched his face like she was looking for cracks in a wall. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, carrying the sound of something almost like a sigh. Caleb realized then that the ranch wasn't empty, it was crowded with memory, with loss. with two people standing at the edge of something neither had planned for. He'd bought land for $1, thinking it was worthless. Instead, he'd purchased a story already in motion, and the girl living inside it was staring at him like he was either the end of her world or the beginning of something far more dangerous. That morning didn't arrive gently at the ranch. It came in pale and sharp, light slicing through the curtains like it was searching for something hidden. Caleb woke on the couch downstairs, stiff and disoriented, for a brief moment forgetting where he was or why the quiet felt charged instead of empty. Then he remembered Mara, the locked room, the way the house had breathed differently once he knew he wasn't alone. He sat up slowly, listening. Somewhere above him, floorboards creaked with deliberate steps, not sneaking, not hiding, just existing. The smell of coffee drifted down the hallway, impossibly normal, and that unsettled him more than the night before. When he reached the kitchen, Mara stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, hair loose now, sunlight catching the tired lines under her eyes. She didn't look like someone trespassing. She looked like someone who belonged. She handed him a chipped mug without asking, as if this routine had already been agreed upon. They spoke carefully at first, circling the truth instead of charging at it. Caleb told her pieces of his life, the job he lost, the accident no one liked to mention, the city that kept moving without him. Mara listened without interrupting, without pity, which made him say more than he intended. In return, she showed him things: the generator hidden behind the barn, the well she'd fixed herself, the journal she kept documenting every repair, every season, every attempt to prove the ranch wasn't dead. Each page felt like evidence. In a trial no one was watching, the deeper he looked, the clearer it became this place hadn't survived by accident. It had survived because she refused to let it go. The tension between them shifted as the day wore on, loosening in small, unexpected ways. They worked side by side, fixing what could be fixed, stepping around what couldn't. Silence settled comfortably now, no longer sharp but thoughtful. Still, unease lingered beneath it all, like thunder waiting for permission. It arrived in the form of a truck crawling up the long dirt road just before sunset. Dust rose behind it in a warning plume. Mara froze. Caleb felt it immediately, the way her body stiffened, the way her hand curled unconsciously into a fist. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. The man who stepped out wore confidence like armor. Boots clean, smile rehearsed. He spoke of paperwork, of errors, of how land sometimes ended up in the wrong hands. He congratulated Caleb on his purchase, with a tone that implied it wouldn't last. Mara stayed silent, jaw set, eyes burning holes into the ground. When the man left, promising to return, the ranch felt smaller somehow, like walls closing in. That night, Mara finally told him everything: the forced sale, the signatures that weren't hers, the officials who stopped answering calls. She admitted she'd expected someone eventually. She just hadn't expected him. Caleb lay awake afterward, staring at the ceiling, realizing he'd crossed an invisible line. Owning the ranch was one thing. Choosing what happened next was another. And for the first time in a long while, the choice terrified him. Days turned into weeks, and something unspoken rooted itself between them. Trust, maybe. Or something more reckless. They shared meals, shared work, shared quiet moments on the porch where the land stretched endlessly before them. Stubborn and beautiful, Caleb began to understand why Mara stayed, why leaving would feel like betrayal. But danger didn't stay patient. Letters arrived, deadlines, threats dressed up as legal courtesy. The pressure mounted until one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Mara asked him the question she'd been holding back since the beginning. She asked if he was going to fight or walk away. Caleb didn't answer right away. He thought of the $1 he'd paid, the joke it was supposed to be. He thought of how the ranch had given him something the city never did, a reason to stay. Awake, when he finally spoke, his voice was steady. He told her he wasn't leaving, that if someone wanted the land, they'd have to take it from both of them. Mara looked at him then, really looked, and something broke open in her expression: relief, fear, hope, all colliding at once. Outside, the wind rolled across the fields, carrying the promise of conflict and change. Caleb had come to the ranch to disappear. Instead, he'd chosen to be seen. And standing beside the girl who refused to vanish, he understood the truth of it at last. Some things cost more than $1, and some are worth paying everything for. The ranch changed once the decision was spoken out loud. It was subtle at first, the way storms always are before they show their teeth. Caleb felt it in the mornings when he stepped outside, and the land seemed to watch him back, no longer indifferent, no longer distant. He and Mara stopped circling each other and started moving in the same direction. They made lists, they argued over priorities, they laughed at stupid things like how the porch leaned so badly it felt drunk, or how the old radio only played one station no matter how often you turned the dial. At night, they sat at the kitchen table under a single flickering bulb, spreading documents out like a map to buried treasure. Mara's journals became weapons now, proof of occupancy, proof of care. Caleb called old contacts he swore he'd never speak to again, favors he hated owing but cashed in anyway. The ranch wasn't just shelter anymore, it was a line in the dirt. And lines, once drawn, tend to attract enemies. The man in the clean boots came back, this time with a surveyor. Then a lawyer's letter followed. Then another, each one pressed harder, testing how much pressure it would take before they cracked. Caleb noticed how Mara slept lighter now, how she startled at engines in the distance. One night, he found her sitting on the porch long after midnight, eyes fixed on the dark fields. She admitted she'd always known this moment would come. She just hadn't known what it would feel like to face it with someone else standing beside her. The admission settled between them like a vow neither dared to name. The confrontation didn't explode the way Caleb expected. It arrived quietly, dressed in legality and polite smiles. County officials showed up one afternoon with clipboards and forced courtesy, walking the land as if it were already theirs. Mara followed them like a shadow, correcting them when they got things wrong, daring them to say she didn't belong. Caleb watched it all with a tightening jaw, understanding now that power rarely shouts, it simply assumes. When the officials left, promising decisions soon, the ranch felt bruised. That night, Mara broke down for the first time, not loudly, not dramatically, just a silent collapse at the kitchen sink, shoulders shaking as years of fear finally found room to breathe. Caleb didn't offer solutions. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He just held her, steady and present, letting the truth exist without fixing it. In that moment, something shifted irreversibly. This wasn't about land anymore. It was about dignity, about being told your life was a clerical error, about refusing to disappear because someone else decided you were inconvenient. When Mara finally pulled back, she looked at him like she was seeing a future she'd never allowed herself to imagine. She told him that if they lost, she'd still be grateful. That for the first time, the ranch hadn't felt like a cage. Caleb answered without thinking. He told her they weren't losing. The ruling came weeks later, folded neatly into an envelope that felt heavier than it should have. Caleb opened it with Mara standing close enough that he could feel her breath. Hitch. The words were dry, impersonal, but the meaning was clear. The sale was under review. The eviction delayed. The fight not over, but no longer hopeless. Mara laughed then, a sharp, disbelieving sound that turned into something softer as relief took hold. They stood in the doorway afterward, watching the sun drop low over the fields, the ranch glowing gold like it was proud of them. Caleb thought about how easily he could have walked away, how close he'd come to choosing nothing again. He hadn't just bought land for $1, he'd invested in resistance, in memory, in a future that refused to be erased. Mara leaned into his side, comfortable now, unafraid. The ranch still wasn't safe, maybe it never would be, but it was alive, and so were they. Whatever came next, courtrooms, threats, long nights of doubt, they would meet it together. Some stories begin with a bargain too good to be true. The real ones begin when you decide what you're willing to fight for after the price is paid. Victory, even a small one, has a strange way of making people careless. Caleb felt it creeping in during the quiet mornings that followed the ruling. When the ranch seemed to relax its shoulders and breathe easier, Mara smiled more openly now, moved through the house without that constant edge of listening for threats. They talked about the future in half-finished sentences, repairs they'd make, fields they might clear, ideas that felt dangerous simply because they involved hope. But the land had taught Mara better than to trust calm too quickly. She stayed vigilant, kept her journals updated, filed copies of every letter, and noticed like she was building a fortress out of paper. Caleb watched her do it with a growing respect that bordered on awe. This wasn't stubbornness. This was survival sharpened into skill. One afternoon, while fixing a broken fence near the far edge of the property, Caleb found fresh tire tracks, cutting across land that hadn't seen vehicles in weeks. They weren't lost tourists. They were deliberate. Mara knelt beside the marks, fingers brushing the dirt, her face tightening in a way he'd learned to read. Someone was testing boundaries. Again, that night, a light flickered near the old storage shed long after the house had gone dark. Caleb grabbed a flashlight, heart thudding, but Mara stopped him with a hand on his arm. She told him some fights aren't won by charging forward. Some are won by watching who blinks first. The pressure returns subtly, like a tide you don't notice rising until your ankles are wet. Neighbors who had ignored the ranch for years suddenly appeared at the fence line, curious, cautious, whispering questions that sounded harmless but carried weight. Rumors traveled faster than truth. Caleb heard pieces of them in town stories about squatters, about illegal occupancy, about a girl who wouldn't let go of land that wasn't hers anymore. Each word felt like a match struck near dry grass. Mara took it harder than she let on. He noticed the way her shoulders tensed when trucks slowed near the road, the way she double-checked locks that hadn't changed. One evening, the man in the clean boots returned not to the ranch, but to town. Caleb crossed paths with him outside the feed store, the encounter brief and civil on the surface. Razor sharp underneath, the man spoke softly about persistence, about how problems resolve themselves when people get tired. Caleb realized then this wasn't just business, it was a waiting game. Someone believed they could outlast them. When he told Mara about the encounter, she nodded like she'd expected it. She admitted she was afraid not of losing the ranch, but of what fighting might cost Caleb. The confession sat heavy between them, fragile and honest. The breaking point came on a night when the wind screamed through the fields like a warning. Caleb woke to the sound of metal groaning, followed by a sharp crack that echoed too close to ignore. They ran outside together, flashlights slicing through darkness, only to find the old barn door ripped from its hinges, hanging by a single bolt. It wasn't vandalism, it was a message. Mara stood there staring at the damage, jaw tight, eyes burning not with fear, but resolve. She told Caleb that this was what they wanted: exhaustion, hesitation, doubt. She asked him one last time if he was still sure. Caleb didn't hesitate. He picked up the fallen door and leaned it back into place as best he could, hands shaking, with adrenaline and something steadier beneath it. He told her the truth that he'd already lost everything once, and it hadn't killed him. Walking away now would. They repaired the door together under the cold stars, working until their hands were numb and their breaths fogged the air. When they finished, the ranch stood scarred but unbroken, and in that silence, stronger than any threat, they understood. Something neither had said aloud yet. Whatever came next wouldn't just decide who owned the land. It would decide who they were willing to become to keep it. After the barn incident, the ranch stopped pretending it was a place of peace. Every creak in the night carried intent. Every unfamiliar sound felt deliberate. Caleb and Mara adjusted without discussing it, falling into a rhythm shaped by vigilance. They set routines, one checked the perimeter while the other handled chores. Never both inside at the same time. Trust deepened in those unspoken understandings. Caleb noticed how Mara moved now, sharper, more certain, as if the threat had burned away the last of her hesitation. One morning, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, Caleb found something that shifted the ground beneath them again. Tucked under warped floorboards was a stack of yellowed documents, deeds, letters, maps marked by hand, names repeated across the pages, all connected to Mara's family. This wasn't just memory, it was proof. When he showed her, her hands trembled as she traced the familiar handwriting. Eyes shining with something close to grief, she admitted she'd searched for these papers for years, convinced they were gone forever. The ranch hadn't just held her, it had guarded her history. They spent the afternoon piecing everything together, realizing the land transfer that stripped her family of ownership had never been clean. It was rushed, manipulated, illegal. For the first time, the fight, Felt winnable. Hope is dangerous when you've survived on endurance. It makes you visible. Words spread faster now about documents found, about a case reopening, about the ranch that wouldn't die quietly. Support came from unexpected places. An old neighbor dropped off supplies without asking questions. A retired clerk from the county office quietly confirmed what the papers suggested. But resistance sharpened too. The man in the clean boots stopped hiding his impatience. Letters arrived weekly, then daily, each more aggressive than the last. One evening, a fire burned near the far fence line. Small but intentional. They put it out before it spread, standing together in the smoke, hearts pounding. Mara's voice shook when she admitted she was scared of what winning might provoke. Caleb understood. People who expect surrender don't react well to defiance. That night, they talked longer than ever before, not about the ranch, but about themselves, about lives paused, dreams deferred, the strange timing that brought them together. Caleb realized he wasn't just protecting land. He was protecting the possibility of something that had quietly grown between them. The hearing was scheduled for early spring, the date stamped in ink that felt heavier than steel. Preparation consumed them, statements, copies, late nights fueled by coffee and stubborn hope. The ranch bore witness to it all, wind carrying their voices across fields that had seemed too much taken too easily. On the eve of the hearing, Mara stood alone at the edge of the property, staring out into the dark. Caleb joined her without speaking. She told him that no matter what happened, she'd already won something. She never thought she'd have a partner who chose to stay. He told her the truth in return, that the ranch had given him back his courage, and she had given it purpose. In the distance, thunder rolled low and slow, promising change. When they turned back toward the house, lights glowing warm against the night, the ranch didn't feel like a battleground anymore. It felt like a home under siege, but a home worth defending. Whatever the court decided, the fight had already rewritten them both. And that, Caleb knew, was something no verdict could take away.